Part 1. The Forbidden Whisper Beneath 6,000 Years of Silence. What if the fate of every vampire, every shadow lurking through time, every monster and every tragic soul depended on one queen? A queen whose secret was buried beneath 6,000 years of blood, betrayal, and forbidden power. Her name was Akasha. To speak it is to summon a weight that crushes history itself. She is not a character in a story. She is the mother of all vampires, the first to taste immortal blood, and the reason her children still fear the sun. Every immortal who walks this earth, whether noble or monstrous, carries her shadow in their veins. But Akasha's story does not begin with blood. It begins in the dust and gold of an age older than pyramids, before mummification sanctified the dead, before the names of gods were carved into stone. She was born a mortal queen in the city of Uruk, a bride not by love but by decree, chosen to wed Enkil, the new ruler. Their union was not a romance, but a political seal, meant to preserve a dynasty and bind two powers into one. Together, they sought to reshape the world. They outlawed cannibalism, turned their people from savagery to the order of farming, and decreed that the dead would be buried with dignity, wrapped in linen, laid to rest in the cool silence of the tomb. It was a revolution draped in silk, and it rattled the bones of ancient customs. For those who still clung to the old ways, this was not progress, it was sacrilege. And yet, over time, the kingdom bent to their will. The seeds of mummification, that solemn rite that would come to define Egypt, were planted in their reign. Akasha and Enkil believed they were shaping civilization, but they had no idea that the gods they prayed to, Osiris, Ra, and the countless spirits who walked unseen, were far less divine than they imagined. Part 2. The Hidden Verse, The Witches Who Would Not Kneel. Part 2. The Hidden Verse, The Witches Who Would Not Kneel. For a time, the kingdom prospered. Harvests swelled, tombs filled with the honored dead, wrapped in linen instead of torn apart for the hunger of the living. But peace, like wine, sours in the wrong cup. With power came indulgence. With indulgence came corruption. Enkil waged wars in distant lands, his banners flying over fields wet with blood. Akasha, restless in the quiet hours between court ceremonies, hungered not for jewels or lovers, but for knowledge. Her ears sharpened for whispers of the forbidden. And then she heard of them. Twin sisters, Maharet and Mekare, witches of a land far from the Nile's embrace. It was said they spoke to spirits as easily as others speak to friends, that the wind itself bent to their words. Akasha sent messengers, cloaked in gold and authority, inviting the twins to her court. It was an invitation draped as a command. The answer returned was neither bow nor blessing. It was refusal, a warning. Evil awaits you, queen, if you force our hands. To Akasha, this was more than defiance. It was an insult carved into her crown. Her soldiers marched at once, arriving during the funeral of the twins' mother. The air there was heavy with incense and grief, but grief was no shield. The village burned. The sisters were seized under a false charge of cannibalism, a crime that still lingered in the memories of the old ways. Dragged before the king and queen, the twins stood proud, their wrists bound, their eyes unflinching in the face of gilded cruelty. Akasha demanded their secrets. How do you speak to the unseen? How do you work your miracles? She promised pardon if they would kneel to her gods, her customs, her rule. Makare's reply was a blade drawn without steel. You have no gods in this kingdom. There are no gods, only spirits, and they play with you as they play with us all. The words struck Akasha like a sudden eclipse. To be told that the deities she prayed to were nothing but shadows and whispers. It was blasphemy wrapped in truth. Fury ignited in her chest. She ordered the twins imprisoned. The priests demanded execution, an old tradition reserved for red-haired twins, a superstition older than the Nile. What followed was not justice, it was humiliation woven into ritual. Days became a cycle of torment. Akasha pressed her questions again and again, desperate to crack open the vault of their power. But the twins gave her nothing but silence and scorn. Until one night, Makare spoke, not to Akasha, but to the air itself.
Part 3. The Echo of Symbols, when the spirit took flesh. The air inside the chamber turned heavy, as if the walls themselves leaned inward to listen. Makare's lips moved without sound, her eyes half closed, her face lit by the wavering light of the oil lamps. Akasha stepped closer, her defiance softening just enough to betray curiosity. Then, a sound. Not footsteps, not a voice, a vibration, like the hum of a vast hive, deep enough to be felt through bone. The shadows along the walls stretched unnaturally, their shapes bending like reeds in a current only they could feel. The guards shifted uneasily, fingers tightening on the hilts of their spears. And then, it was there. Invisible, but undeniable. A presence that pressed against the skin, probing, tasting. Akasha, ever proud, raised her chin. "Show yourself," she commanded. What answered was not sight, but sensation. Her skin erupted in 1,000 tiny cuts, each one stinging as if kissed by fire. Something unseen drank from those wounds with greedy precision, its hunger so intimate it made her knees weaken. Gasps escaped from those watching. Akasha's breath caught, a sharp, indrawn sound that betrayed pain and something else. When it ended, she was left trembling, her gown marked with the pinpricks of blood that trickled like red script down her skin. Her voice, when it came, was colder than before. She hissed, "You have brought blasphemy into my court." And with that, she had the twins dragged back to their cell, her rage no longer a mask for her unease. But something had followed her from that chamber. At night, in the stillness of her private rooms, she felt it, the same vibration, low and patient, coiling through her thoughts like smoke. It did not speak in words, yet she understood it. It was curious about her. It wanted more. And soon, it would have her. Part 4. The Shadow That Speaks. Birth of the Damned. The palace had grown tense in the days after the summoning. Whispers clung to the halls like cobwebs. Old loyalties stirred, and the followers of the ancient ways, those who still worshipped blood as sacrament, began to move in the shadows. One night, they struck. The chamber doors burst open, and blades flashed in the torchlight. Akasha's scream cut the air, not from fear, but from the shock of betrayal. Steel bit into her flesh again and again. Ankle fell beside her, his crown rolling across the floor. Blood spread in dark rivers along the stone. And then, as her life bled out of her, she felt it. The vibration, the presence, the thing that had tasted her once before was now everywhere. Inside her ears, beneath her skin, curling around her heart like a serpent. It would not let her go. Invisible hands clutched her soul, pulling it back into her dying body. And with a force that felt like both violation and embrace, it entered her. The agony was indescribable. Every nerve ignited, every bone alight with a fire that was not fire. Her eyes snapped open. The wounds that had been fatal moments before were sealing themselves shut, knitting with impossible speed. Her skin was colder now, her hearing sharper, her hunger absolute. She rose. The assassins who had struck her froze in place as her gaze met theirs. They saw not a queen, but a predator. In the blur of a heartbeat, she was upon them, tearing, drinking, draining life itself in mouthfuls that tasted like victory. When it was over, the chamber was silent, but for the sound of her breathing. She turned to Ankle, dying, pale, his lifeblood pooling beneath him. Without hesitation, she opened her wrist and pressed it to his lips. At first, he resisted. Then the taste reached him. He drank. And as her blood entered him, the transformation began. Bones shifting, skin tightening, eyes flooding with unnatural clarity. Ankle gasped as the last of his human heartbeat faded, replaced by something eternal. The first queen found her first king, and the age of the damned had begun.
Part 5. The Mirror and the Flame. Night becomes the throne.
The change was not subtle, it was absolute. Akasha could hear the pulse of every living thing within the palace walls, a chorus of heartbeats, each one a drum summoning her hunger. Her eyes saw the world in layers she had never known, the shimmer of heat rising from a candle flame, the faint tremor in a servant's hand before they even knew they were afraid, the thin silver thread of breath in the cold night air. Night was no longer a curtain to sleep beneath, it was her throne. Beside her, Inkle moved with the same impossible speed. Their steps made no sound on marble. Their whispers could be heard across great halls. Thoughts, not just words, passed between them like sparks. But the gift was also a curse. The sun, once warm upon their skin, now burned like the gaze of an angry god. They hid from it, calling the darkness their domain. And their first acts in that darkness were acts of vengeance. The assassins who had spilled their blood were hunted without mercy. One by one, their killers awoke to find the queen's golden eyes at their bedside, the king's cold hand at their throat. The court that had once whispered doubts now whispered prayers, but it was too late. Prayers do not sway predators. Yet even as the palace bled, Akasha's hunger was not satisfied. It was not only food she sought, but understanding. The spirit inside her, Amel, was too vast for one body. Every time she created a new vampire, some part of that force stretched into them, a tether that bound all of her kind to her will. Maharet warned her, the more you share the blood, the weaker its hunger becomes, but the bond remains. Akasha listened, but did not yield. Knowledge was a crown heavier than gold, and she would wear it alone. The twins were punished beyond cruelty. Maharet's eyes torn away, Makari's tongue severed. Their silence and blindness meant to end the threat they posed. But vengeance, like blood, cannot be destroyed, only transferred. Cayman, her loyal guard, now turned by her own blood, chose his side. He transformed Makari, who in turn transformed Maharet. The first brood of the damned was complete, and with them, war was inevitable.
Part 6. The Vanishing Psalm, when the queen was turned to stone. The first brood did not bow. They were born of her blood, but not her will. Some believed their power could redeem the world. Others sought only chaos and dominion. The night itself split into factions, and the war began. Akasha and Enkil fought as gods among lesser predators, but even gods can be outnumbered. Merharat and Makare, driven by loss and mutilation, wove alliances in shadow. Their fledglings learned quickly, and their thirst for freedom burned hotter than their thirst for blood. The battles raged across continents, from desert tombs to jungle temples, from mountain fortresses to the salt-stained harbors of the old world. The humans who stumbled into these wars never understood what they saw. Only whispers remained, demons in human form, angels who drank blood, statues that walked beneath the moon. But the queen's reign faltered. Captured alongside her king, Akasha was entombed in diorite, a stone harder than granite, cold enough to drink the heat from flesh. They left her head and neck exposed to the air, marble-like, still, a statue carved by something older than art. For centuries, she lay that way, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to die. Her keepers became priests, her prison a shrine. To harm her was to risk annihilation for all her kind. For whatever befell the queen would echo into the veins of every vampire on earth. In time, her captivity was wrapped in reverence. She was those who must be kept, a title not of honor, but of necessity. Yet stillness was not surrender. Jewels would vanish from the hands of her keepers. Doors left closed at night would stand open by dawn. Shadows would move in chambers where no living thing stirred. She was stone to the touch, but her will was unbroken. The vanishing psalm, that unspoken law of their kind, was born in these centuries. Protect the queen at all costs, or all will be lost. And so the world turned, ages rising and falling, while the queen of the damned waited in silence, her hunger curling like smoke behind eyes of gold.
Part 7. The Return of the Unspoken, when stone learned to breathe again. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell, ships gave way to steel trains, and steel trains gave way to the roar of engines in the sky. Electric light banished the dark from human cities, but not from the hearts of the damned. Akasha slept through it all, her skin smooth as polished marble, her golden eyes sealed beneath unmoving lids. Marius, her latest keeper, watched the modern world swell around them, cinema, electricity, the hum of machines, hoping some spark of this age might awaken her. But she did not stir. It was not invention that reached her. It was a voice, music, raw, rebellious, unafraid. The voice of a vampire who dared the unthinkable, to step into human light and sing of their existence. Lestat. The sound pierced centuries of silence. Something within her, something older than Amel's binding, answered. One night, stone became flesh again. Her eyes opened. The air shivered. Marius knew the danger instantly, but he could no more stop her than halt the tide. Akasha stood, her movement slow, deliberate, like a statue remembering it had once been alive. She did not rise for love, she rose for purpose. Her first act was merciless. She drained Enkel completely, ending their reign as king and queen in a single cold decision. Love was nothing next to necessity. The blood restored her in ways centuries could not, and she sought the voice that had stirred her. She found Lestat on stage, lights burning against his pale skin, 1,000 human eyes upon him. In the chaos of his own music, he felt her before he saw her, a presence like gravity, pulling every beat of his undead heart toward her. She took him, not as prey, but as consort. The union was not tender, it was an alliance, a binding of two predators beneath one crown. And with her return, the vampire worlds trembled. The weakest burned in sudden death. The strongest felt her will like a weight on their minds. The queen was no longer silent, and her hunger was ready to redraw the world.
Part 8. Echoes in the Forbidden, when a goddess fell silent. Her return was not a rebirth, it was a conquest. Akasha did not hide her vision. She would burn the old order to ash, leaving a single perfect world, one molded in her image. Her plan was stark. Erase almost every man from the earth, leave only a remnant to serve as breeding stock. Women would worship her as divine mother, kneel as angels in her new Eden. It was not love she offered, but obedience. And when she gathered the surviving elders at Maharet's sanctuary, not one bowed. The queen's eyes hardened to molten gold, her voice low and absolute. Then you will perish. But before the killing could begin, the air shifted. From the shadows stepped Makare, silent for centuries, her eyes burning with the weight of 1,000 wrongs. She moved without hesitation, hurling herself at Akasha. They crashed through glass, a shard catching the queen's neck. The cut was clean. Her head fell. The silence that followed was worse than the scream. For in that moment, every vampire felt the abyss yawning beneath them. Makare knelt, not in reverence, but in hunger. She consumed Akasha's brain and heart, the sacred core that held Amel. The spirit tore free of its ancient prison and bound itself to a new vessel. The queen's body, emptied of its soul, became a transparent husk, beautiful, useless. The world of the damned shuddered. For millennia, Akasha had been the axis upon which they turned. Now she was gone, and the axis spun without anchor. Makare did not claim the throne. She bore the weight of a Mel in silence, neither savior nor tyrant. But Akasha's shadow lingered. In every vampire who closed their eyes, her voice whispered still, that all that you are comes from me. It was no longer a command, it was a truth. And as the centuries turned, the legend of the Queen of the Damned grew, not as a ruler, but as a warning, that those who seek to be gods will find themselves abandoned, not worshipped. And in the end, it is not your enemies who destroy you, but the hunger you cannot master.